Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and the new 12.9-inch iPad Pro is also here. This is the product that I was lamenting purchasing because I bought the most powerful version of the iPad Pro. I bought the 1 terabyte version, which comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM. The lower tiered storage options actually come with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this is kind of insanity for an iPad, right? You know, the new iPad Pro comes with the M1 chip. The M1 chip is super capable, and in fact, the iMac we just unboxed the other day, the one that's right behind me, a full-fledged desktop computer, comes with the same exact M1 chip, and my version comes with the same exact 16 gigabytes of memory. So in reality, what is separating these two products? And right now it's the software. I got this iPad Pro, the most powerful one, the most capable one, because I wanted to see, can anything on iPadOS right now or in the future take advantage of the tremendous hardware power that is inside of this tablet? So I already set up the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. I've been using it kind of all day, and I definitely have a lot of initial impressions that I want to share with you. Again, I will state this fully. You know, I've had this iPad Pro for like a day. This is not a full review. There's still a lot of things I need to test out, especially on the performance side, but these are the initial impressions I wanted to go over, and maybe I can help you out here with some of the things that I found interesting with this iPad Pro. First of all, I will say that the, form factor did change a little bit. This iPad Pro is now slightly thicker, and at first I was wondering, will I actually be able to tell if this thing is thicker? And, when you put it side by side against the older 12.9-inch iPad Pro, you can definitely see the increase in thickness, although with day-to-day use, I really struggle to think that most people are going to notice, and I actually think that some people are going to prefer the added thickness because we all know the infamous iPad Pro Bendgate story. So, some people are asking, hey, Apple, just make the iPad Pro a little bit thicker so it doesn't bend as easily. And that's basically what you get here. It's a little bit thicker this time. So if you were concerned about bending this big device, maybe that little bit of added material will mean that it doesn't bend as easily. Weight too. So this iPad Pro is 0.1 pounds heavier than the last iteration, which weighed 1.4 pounds. This one weighs 1.5 pounds. Again, not a big difference. Same thing with the thickness. Although this is the thing I think more people are going to notice. If you are using this primarily in tablet mode, if you're using this a lot, holding it up like this or holding it in a landscape orientation, you may not notice it right away, but for prolonged use, if you're holding this thing up for 30 minutes, I think the weight does start to become a little bit more noticeable. Of course, the newest feature that is exclusive to the 12.9 version of the iPad Pro is that new mini LED display. It's one of the primary reasons I got the bigger iPad Pro this year over the 11-inch version, because the 11-inch version still just comes with that standard liquid retina display. So now this mini LED display on the iPad Pro can get significantly brighter. It can get up to 1000 nits of full screen brightness. And then when you're watching HDR video, you can actually get up to 1600 nits of screen brightness. And the differences in that display quality were immediately apparent to me. Even on the startup screen, I felt like the display just looked better, but you could really see the difference when you were watching HDR video, and you could definitely see the increase in dynamic range. You could see the better black levels on this iPad Pro. This iPad Pro has way better contrast ratios than the previous version, and it's getting a lot closer to what OLED displays can put off. Now, based on my initial impressions, I wouldn't say this is as good as OLED in terms of pure black levels, but it's pretty close. The display is really good on this. So much so, in fact, that I really hope that, Apple is going to be bringing the mini LED display technology to more of their product lineup. I would love to see it on, the iMac behind me. The iMac already has a great display, but this iPad Pro really is a step above what Apple traditionally does with their P3 wide color displays or their Retina displays. But other than, the increase in screen brightness, which is nice. I mean, I was using it outdoors too, and you could, still see things on a big 12.9-inch display, even in direct sunlight. I had the sun like beaming down, hitting the iPad Pro. The sun reflection was in the iPad Pro. I was almost like looking at it, almost getting blinded. But I could still see all of my content on the tablet display, which, again, I don't know how many people are using a giant 12.9-inch iPad Pro outside all the time, but if that sounds like you, this increase in screen brightness could be very advantageous to you. Another new addition to this version of the iPad Pro that I wanted to test out was the Thunderbolt port. This is actually a problem I ran into in the past because I actually bought an external solid-state drive that ran through a Thunderbolt connection. Because it had a Thunderbolt connection, this external drive was almost as fast as internal storage, and it's something that I used on my Mac when I was editing video. I tried to bring that footage into older versions of the iPad Pro through its USB-C port, considering it's the same connector, but because it did not have Thunderbolt technology, it would never recognize that faster hard drive. Well, on this iPad Pro, I did that same test, bringing over that Thunderbolt external drive, plugging it in, and yeah, it recognized it instantly, and I was able to access all of the files. So I think this Thunderbolt port is really great for not only connecting super fast drives to this iPad Pro, but you could also technically hook up a full dock to it with all sorts of USB-A and USB-C and HDMI and SD card slot connections. And also, Apple says you can now connect up to a 6K Pro display all through that single cable connection. I think the Thunderbolt port on the iPad Pro is really important for its versatility as a product and really does help it become more of a computer. I also got to try out the center stage feature, which is the new feature in the camera, where it kind of captures this huge wide angle view, and then it will actually use machine learning to focus on human subjects. So it can kind of zoom in and out and pan around, and it's done extremely well. It reminds me of just classic Apple hardware and software solution by combining this ultra wide angle camera on the front and then taking the software to make this a much better experience for video calls. I was also interested to try connecting the older 12.9-inch iPad Pro keyboard, especially after the initial kerfuffle. Is kerfuffle a word? Kerfuffle of the, stories that the older iPad Pro keyboard would not fit the newer version of the iPad Pro. I think even Apple themselves initially said it wouldn't fit, but I got it, I, put it on, and hey, I don't know what anyone was talking about. Maybe there's some misalignment here with the fit, maybe it doesn't fit as flush. I personally could not tell the difference. The older keyboard seemed to fit just fine. It's an expensive keyboard. It retails for $350. So if you're upgrading from an older iPad Pro and you already have a Magic Keyboard, I don't think there's any reason to go out and buy the new one. I think the old one fits just fine. Now, for me, I'm an idiot. So I went ahead and bought a new Magic Keyboard because they came out with this new white version. And I really like this new white version. I think it looks really sleek and clean. I think it looks better than the older space gray or black version that they had before. And I'm hopeful that this version doesn't show as much dust and grime. I know it's white, so you would think, oh, that's going to show dirt easier. But my main problem with the older iPad Pro was it just picked up a lot of lint and dust, and you could easily see it on the black exterior. So with this Magic Keyboard being white, I'm hoping that isn't a problem. So out of the box, it looks great, right? It's nice and pristine. Again, I got to use this longer to see if this is going to look awful with like 2 weeks of use and there's going to be, Dorito dust all over it. That's something for the full Greg review that you're gonna have to stick around for. And I don't wanna make this video any longer than it has to be, so, traditional iPad stuff is still pretty much the same, right? It's still running iPad OS. It still, works exactly the same with multitasking. It still has Face ID. It still has 120 hertz ProMotion. Everything you loved about the previous iPad Pros, it is still all here. The big change this time, though, is that M1 processor. When Apple put the M1 processor in, when they announced it at the event, that was the thing that really caught my attention, because this thing is really powerful, and the iPads have been powerful for quite some time. But is there anything that can really take advantage of this M1 processor? That's why I got this thing in the first place. So of course, I loaded up the usual Geekbench benchmark, and I pretty much knew what to expect here because, again, same M1 chip as like a MacBook Air, and the iPad Pro doesn't have a fan in it either, so I was expecting a similar score. And guess what? We got a similar score of a single core score of 1718 and a multi-core score of 7283. If that doesn't sound impressive to you, I don't know what planet you're on, because, the processor in this iPad Pro, and you can get this on an 11-inch, 1-pound tablet, is stronger than some of the processors found in a 16-inch MacBook Pro. Like, that amount of computing power in an iPad, it's just a feat of engineering. It's an accomplishment that Apple is able to do this, and it's kind of crazy. Even crazier is the fact that this is the 1 terabyte version, so it has 16 gigabytes of memory. This iPad Pro should theoretically be able to handle everything that I've been doing on my M1 Macs, whether that's the MacBook Air to the Mac Mini, MacBook Pro, and now the new M1 iMac. I should be able to export videos super quickly. I should have no stuttering in my timeline. But I feel like the iPad was kind of already doing that with previous iterations of even the A12X processor. So that's something I still need to test for a full review. Again, I haven't spent enough time with this iPad Pro to really see if the 16 gigabyte version or if this M1 is overkill on iPadOS 15. Some of my initial tests, though, were interesting. So I'm sure a lot of people might even just get the 16 gigabyte version to just keep apps open in memory longer. Something I still have to test more of, right? But again, initial impressions, I noticed that every app that I basically opened, if I go back into it, I think at this point, it's just been saved in memory. So I'm going into the web browser, something's still saved. I'm opening up the podcast app. It is right where I left off when shooting the B-roll for this. If I open up Twitter, it didn't close. So all of the apps that I opened previously, let's try YouTube because that's famous for closing down. No, I'm still on Patrick Tomaso's YouTube page. I was watching Patrick Tomaso. Don't judge me. I know a lot of people don't like his content because it's controversial. I find him to be enlightening, okay? I find him to be a modern-day Da Vinci. But anyway, even as I scroll through all of my apps here, if I go into like the last app I opened, which was Geekbench, the score is still preserved there. The app didn't have to reload. So if you wanted an iPad Pro and you just want to, all your apps open, you never wanted to reload them, first impressions, the apps are staying open for longer than they would on the previous versions of the iPad Pro, which at max came with 6 gigabytes of RAM. But then there's the other side of this M1 story. So one of the things I thought that the M1 would be able to do way better is gaming, right? The M1 has better graphics than the A12Z does. It has an 8-core GPU inside of it. So I thought, hey, let me load up Call of Duty Mobile. That's usually what I test when I'm doing gaming sections of any iOS-related product. And I bet with this M1 iPad Pro, I'm going to be able to max out the frame rate and max out the graphics, right? No. I went to Call of Duty Mobile, tried to enable the settings, and no matter what I did, you either had to pick between one or the other. You could either have the max frame rate or the max graphics. Now, I don't know if this is a limitation of the M1 iPad Pro or, if Call of Duty Mobile just isn't optimized for the M1 yet. Maybe there's going to be a patch in, a couple weeks and all of a sudden they're going to go, you know what? If you're on the latest iPad Pro, you can enable max graphics and max frame rates. But that was just one test that kind of took me back a little bit. I was expecting to easily go into that game, which, ran at those same settings on an A12Z processor, and I was expecting the M1 to do more here. Overall, though, using this iPad Pro for a little bit, my impressions are a little bit mixed. Don't get me wrong, I like the iPad a lot, and the hardware on this thing it is so nice, right? You got the nice display. That mini LED display is gorgeous. You got the Pro Motion 120 hertz refresh rate. You got the power of the M1 inside of this machine. This thing is sleek, it is futuristic, it is super versatile too now. So not only do you get a really amazing tablet, but you can also get an accessory like the Magic Keyboard, and all of a sudden you have a great laptop alternative. You take it off the keyboard, you pick up the Apple Pencil, you got a full-blown graphics tablet right there in front of you, and there is some great software on the iPad that's also pretty affordable too when you're comparing it to Mac software. But the capabilities of this iPad Pro seem a step ahead of where the software is currently. I know WWDC is a couple weeks away as I'm making this video. I'm sure my full review of this iPad Pro is going to be before WWDC, but I'm wondering if the story of this iPad Pro is kind of half told at this point, because the hardware is so capable now that all it's really waiting on to unleash this thing is proper software. So we're gonna wait and see if that's the case. I'm gonna try my best to see if this iPad is good enough with the current software it has, or if it needs something more. But I think I rambled long enough. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully these first impressions were valuable to you. If they were, please leave me a like if you want to see more from the channel. Obviously, make sure you're subscribed. I mean, come on, you gotta wait for the full review, see if this thing is gonna suit everyone's needs. Also, hey, if you're interested in the iPad Pro and this was enough for you and you're like, I'm gonna get it, you can use one of my affiliate links in the description below. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone. Is that how I usually say it?